Hello and welcome to the Comfort Corner. Please hit the like button and the subscribe button so you don't miss any cozy stories. Now, sit back and relax. In a quiet corner of the world, nestled between the last breath of twilight and the first whisper of dreams, there existed a realm few had ever seen. It was not marked on any map, nor spoken of in stories passed down through generations. This place was called Somnalis, and it shimmered like starlight on water, always just out of reach, unless one knew how to drift beyond the edge of sleep. Here lived the dream weaver. Her name was Leora, and she was as old as the first lullaby ever sung. Her cottage sat atop a hill of moonflowers, their petals glowing faintly in the night air. The walls of her home were woven from threads of twilight, and the roof was stitched with clouds. Inside, shelves brimmed with spools of dream thread, silver for serenity, blue for bravery, gold for joy, and soft lavender for healing. Each night, as the world below settled into slumber, Leora would sit at her loom, her fingers dancing like wind over water. She spun blankets. Not ordinary ones, but ones that wrapped around the soul. They carried warmth that soothed aching hearts, patterns that whispered forgotten hopes, and textures that cradled restless minds. Tonight, she was working on a special blanket. A child named Ember, no older than 7, had cried herself to sleep in the waking world. Her dreams had grown tangled, knotted with fear and loneliness. Leora had heard the tremble in Ember's breath as she crossed into Somnalis, and now she wove with urgency, her loom humming with purpose. The blanket she spun was soft as sighs and light as laughter. It shimmered with threads of courage and comfort, stitched with tiny stars that pulsed gently like a heartbeat. As she worked, she whispered stories into the weave, tales of brave foxes, gentle giants, and skies that never turned gray. When the blanket was finished, Leora folded it carefully and stepped outside. The moonflowers parted for her, and the wind carried her to Ember's dream. She found the child curled in a shadowed corner of her own mind, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit. Her cheeks were damp, her brow furrowed. Leora knelt beside her and gently draped the blanket over her shoulders. "Sleep now, little one," she murmured. "You are safe." Ember's breath slowed. Her grip on the rabbit loosened. And for the first time in many nights, she smiled. Ember's dream began to shift. The shadows that had clung to the corners of her mind melted away, replaced by soft light and gentle colors. The ground beneath her turned to plush moss, and the sky above shimmered with hues of peach and lavender. Her stuffed rabbit twitched its nose and blinked, suddenly alive and smiling. Leora stood quietly, watching the transformation. She never stayed long, her work was to mend, not to linger, but something in Ember's dream held her a moment longer. "Who are you?" Ember asked, her voice small but curious. "I'm a weaver," Leora replied, kneeling beside her. "I make blankets for dreams." Ember touched the fabric wrapped around her shoulders. "It feels like my mom's hugs. Before she got sick." Leora smiled gently. "Then I've done my job." The rabbit hopped into Ember's lap, and she giggled, a sound that rang like wind chimes through the dreamscape. The moss beneath them bloomed with tiny flowers, and a breeze carried the scent of vanilla and honey. "Will you come back?" Ember asked, her eyes wide. "I come when I'm needed," Leora said. "But you'll always have this blanket. It will remember you, even when you forget." Ember nodded solemnly, then leaned forward and hugged Leora tightly. The dream weaver closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the child's gratitude wrap around her like a second blanket. Then, as dreams do, the moment began to fade. Leora stood and stepped back. The moonflowers bloomed again around her feet, and the wind lifted her gently into the sky. Ember watched her go, the blanket still wrapped around her, and whispered, "Thank you." Back in Somnalis, Leora returned to her cottage. She placed the empty spool of lavender thread back on the shelf and lit a small lantern made of firefly glass. Outside, the stars blinked in approval. She sat by her loom once more, fingers poised, listening. Somewhere, another soul stirred restlessly in sleep. And the dream weaver began to spin again. The wind in somnolence carried whispers, soft, fragmented echoes of dreams unraveling. Leora paused, her fingers hovering above the loom. Tonight's call was different. It wasn't a child this time, but someone older. Worn. A soul whose dreams had thinned with time. She reached for a spool of deep indigo thread, flecked with silver. This thread was rare, spun from the quiet strength of forgotten lullabies and the resilience of hearts that had weathered many storms. As she wove, the loom responded with a low hum, resonating with the weight of memory. The dream belonged to Mr. Thatch, a retired librarian who lived alone in a small town where the winters were long and the nights longer. He had once filled his days with stories, guiding young minds through the pages of adventure and wonder. But now, his shelves gathered dust, and his dreams had grown dim. Leora stepped into his dream gently. It was a quiet place, an empty library with flickering lights and rows of books that no longer spoke. Mr. Thatch sat at a desk, staring at a blank page, his hands trembling slightly. The air was heavy with silence. She approached without a sound, the blanket folded neatly in her arms. It was rich and textured, like the cover of a well-loved book. She draped it over his shoulders, and the change was immediate. The light steadied. The books began to whisper again. Mr. Thatch blinked, then looked up at her. "I remember this feeling," he said softly. "It's like the first time I read The Wind in the Willows." Leora smiled. "Stories never leave us. Sometimes, they just need a little warmth to wake up." He closed his eyes, and the library around him bloomed. Children's laughter echoed through the aisles, and the scent of old paper and ink filled the air. The blank page before him began to fill with words, his own story, finally ready to be told. Leora stepped back, her work complete. And somewhere in the waking world, Mr. Thatch stirred in his sleep, a smile forming on his lips. That night, as the stars wheeled slowly over somnolence, Leora sat quietly by her loom, her hands resting in her lap. The threads were still, but her heart was full. Each dream she touched left a trace, a warmth, a whisper, a memory. She never kept them, but they lingered like the scent of rain on stone. She stood and stepped outside. The moonflowers bowed gently in the breeze, and the sky above shimmered with the soft glow of dreams in progress. Across the hills, the dream river flowed, its waters reflecting the colors of sleeping minds. Leora walked to its edge, dipping her fingers into the current. Visions flickered across the surface, children chasing fireflies, elders dancing in gardens of memory, lovers reunited beneath starlit skies. Each dream was a world, and each world was a thread in the great tapestry of sleep. But then, something strange caught her eye. A ripple in the river. A dream that didn't flow. She leaned closer and saw a boy, no older than 10, trapped in a dream of endless gray. No color, no sound, no movement. Just stillness. His name came to her like a breath, Nico. Leora's brow furrowed. This was no ordinary dream. It had been stilled, frozen by something deeper than fear. She returned to her cottage and reached for a spool she rarely used, one woven from the threads of forgotten dreams, the ones that had never been allowed to bloom. She worked quickly, her fingers moving with purpose. This blanket would be different. It would not just comfort, it would awaken. It would remind. When it was done, she stepped into Nico's dream. The grayness was thick, like fog. Nico sat in the center, unmoving, his eyes dull. Leora approached and knelt beside him, wrapping the blanket around his shoulders. At first, nothing happened. Then, a flicker. A single spark of color bloomed at his feet, a tiny red kite, tugging gently at its string. Nico blinked. The red kite tugged again, its tail fluttering like a heartbeat in the stillness. Nico's eyes followed it, uncertain at first, then curious. The gray around him began to thin, like mist touched by morning sun. Leora knelt beside him, her voice soft. "Do you remember this kite?" Nico blinked slowly. "It was my brother's. We used to fly it in the park, before the accident." The words came out brittle, like leaves in winter. But the kite danced higher, pulling color behind it, streaks of crimson and gold that painted the sky above them. The ground beneath Nico's feet shifted, becoming soft grass. A breeze stirred, carrying the scent of spring. Leora placed a hand on his shoulder. "Dreams don't forget, even when we do. They wait. Quietly. Until we're ready." Nico looked down at the blanket wrapped around him. It shimmered now, alive with threads of memory, laughter, sunlight, the sound of sneakers on pavement. His lips parted, and a breath he hadn't realized he was holding escaped. "I thought I wasn't allowed to be happy anymore," he whispered. "You are," Leora said. "Grief doesn't erase joy. It just makes room for it to return." The kite soared, and with it, Nico stood. The grayness was gone now, replaced by a wide, open field. In the distance, a figure waved, a boy with the same eyes, the same smile. Nico took a step forward, then another, the blanket trailing behind him like a cape. Leora watched him go, her heart full. She didn't follow. This part of the dream belonged to him. Back in Somnalis, the loom was still. The spools of thread glowed faintly, as if resting. Leora sat by the window, sipping tea made from starlight and chamomile, and watched the dream lanterns drift across the sky. Each one was a story. A soul. A moment of healing. And she would be ready for the next. The next morning in Somnalis arrived not with sunlight, but with a soft cascade of dreamlight, gentle hues that bathed the hills and valleys in a glow of renewal. Leora stepped outside, her bare feet brushing against dew-kissed petals. The air was quiet, but not empty. It hummed with possibility. She wandered to the edge of the dream river again, watching the lanterns drift lazily across the surface. Each one held a dream she had touched, a story she had helped mend. But today, something new stirred in the current. A ripple of golden light. It pulsed, slow and steady, and then rose from the water like a bubble. Inside it, Leora saw a vision, not of a single dreamer, but of many. A village, nestled in the folds of sleep, where dreams had begun to fade. Not from fear or grief, but from forgetting. The people had grown too busy, too tired, too tangled in the waking world to remember how to dream. Leora's heart ached. She had seen this before, whole communities drifting into a kind of quiet numbness, their nights filled with blankness instead of wonder. She returned to her cottage and reached for a basket of threads she rarely used. These were ancient, spun from the first dreams ever dreamed, threads of imagination, curiosity, and play. She wove not a blanket this time, but a tapestry. It was vast, stretching across her loom like a horizon. She stitched stories into it, flying ships, talking animals, forests that sang lullabies. She added laughter, stitched in spirals, and courage, woven in bold strokes. When it was finished, she folded it carefully and summoned the wind. The tapestry flew. It drifted across Somnalis, carried by moonlight and memory, until it reached the village. There, it unfurled above the rooftops, casting a gentle glow. One by one, the villagers stirred in their sleep. Their dreams began to bloom again, colorful, wild, and free. Children dreamed of candy clouds and dragon friends. Elders dreamed of dances they hadn't dared in years. Artists dreamed in brushstrokes, and bakers in flavors no one had tasted before. And Leora, watching from afar, smiled. Her work was never done. But it was always worth doing. That night, as the tapestry floated gently above the dreaming village, Leora returned to her loom and found something she hadn't expected, a single thread of her own. It shimmered faintly, a soft rose-gold hue, and pulsed with a rhythm she recognized but hadn't felt in a long time, her own dream, long buried beneath centuries of weaving for others. She touched it gently, and a memory stirred. A field of wild poppies. A voice calling her name. Laughter, hers, echoing through the hills. Leora sat down, her hands trembling slightly. She hadn't dreamed for herself in ages. Not since she had taken up the mantle of dream weaver. But the thread was insistent, tugging at her heart like a child's hand. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in 1,000 years, Leora dreamed. She stood in a meadow bathed in golden light. The sky above was painted with the colors of dawn, and the air was filled with the scent of blooming things. In the distance, a figure approached, tall, cloaked in starlight, with eyes like the deep sea. "Leora," the figure said, smiling. "You've come home." She knew the voice. It belonged to Oren, the dream weaver before her. The one who had taught her, long ago, how to spin comfort from sorrow and hope from silence. "I thought I wasn't allowed to dream anymore," she whispered. Oren shook his head. "Even weavers need rest. Even weavers need wonder." He reached out and took her hand, and together they walked through the meadow. Flowers bloomed in their wake, and the sky sang a lullaby only dreamers could hear. When Leora awoke, the thread was still in her hand. She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. And then, with renewed strength, she turned back to her loom. Because somewhere, just beyond the edge of sleep, another soul was waiting. And the dream weaver was ready. High above the world, where the clouds thinned into wisps and the sky turned velvet blue, a quiet little sprite named Lumina floated on a breeze no human could feel. Her wings shimmered like moonlight on water, delicate and translucent, catching the faintest glimmers of starlight. She wore a cloak stitched from comet tails and a satchel woven from nebula threads, slung across her shoulder and glowing faintly with the dust of dreams. Lumina had a very special job. Each night, as the stars blinked into view and the world below settled into sleep, she would rise from her perch on the crescent spire, a crystalline tower hidden in the folds of the northern wind, and begin her sacred task, collecting fallen stardust. Stardust was precious. It held the memories of stars long extinguished, the whispers of cosmic lullabies, and the warmth of light that had traveled eons to reach Earth. When a star shed its dust, it drifted down in silvery trails, invisible to most eyes, settling on mountaintops, treetops, rooftops, and rivers. Lumina's job was to gather it before it faded, before it was lost to time. Tonight, the sky was particularly busy. A cluster of stars in the western quadrant had begun their descent, their dust trailing like glittering tears. Lumina zipped through the air, her satchel swinging gently as she reached out with her gloved hands, catching the particles mid-fall. Each speck she collected pulsed with a soft light, humming a note of its origin. She paused above a quiet village nestled in a valley, where the rooftops glistened faintly with fresh stardust. Children dreamed below, their minds open and curious, drawing the dust toward them like magnets. Lumina smiled. Stardust loved dreamers. But then, something strange happened. A streak of light tore across the sky, not a shooting star, but something heavier, faster, and burning with a deep violet hue. It crashed beyond the hills with a soundless thud, sending a ripple through the air that made Lumina's wings flutter involuntarily. She hovered, uncertain. Stardust didn't fall like that. And it never glowed violet. Lumina hesitated, her wings twitching with unease. The violet glow still pulsed faintly beyond the hills, like a heartbeat in the dark. She had never seen stardust behave like that. It was too heavy, too loud, too alive. She glanced at her satchel, now half full with the soft shimmer of ordinary stardust. Her duty was clear: collect, return, restore. But something about that crash tugged at her curiosity, a feeling she rarely indulged. Sprites were meant to observe, not interfere. Still, she found herself drifting toward the glow. The wind grew colder as she approached the crash site. Trees below bent away from the impact zone, their leaves tinged with a strange silver frost. The grass shimmered unnaturally, and the air buzzed with static. Lumina descended slowly, her wings folding as she landed on a mossy stone at the edge of a shallow crater. At the center of the crater lay a shard of something not quite metal, not quite stone. It pulsed with violet light, etched with symbols that shimmered and shifted when she tried to focus on them. Lumina stepped closer, her breath catching. It wasn't stardust. It was something else. A soft sound broke the silence, a whimper, high and trembling. Lumina turned sharply, her eyes scanning the shadows. There, half buried in the grass, was a figure no larger than herself. A child. No, not a human child. Its skin was pale blue, its eyes wide and silver, and its wings, tattered and scorched, twitched weakly. Lumina rushed forward, kneeling beside the creature. It looked up at her, frightened but conscious. "You're hurt," she whispered, reaching into her satchel for a pinch of stardust. "Don't move." The creature flinched as the dust touched its skin, but then relaxed, the glow of the dust seeping into its wounds. It blinked slowly, then spoke in a voice like wind through reeds. "Help me." Lumina's heart, if such a thing could be said of a sprite, ached. She had never been trained for this. But she couldn't leave it here. Not tonight. Not alone. Lumina wrapped her cloak around the creature, shielding it from the chill that radiated off the violet shard. The stardust she'd sprinkled had dulled the pain, but it wasn't enough. This being, whatever it was, wasn't from her world. Its energy was different, older, and tangled with something she couldn't name. "Can you fly?" she asked softly. The creature shook its head, eyes wide with fear. "Wings, broken." Lumina bit her lip. She wasn't supposed to bring anything back to the Crescent Spire. The rules were clear. But the rules had never accounted for this. She glanced at the shard again. It pulsed once, then dimmed, as if sensing her attention. Something about it felt wrong. Not evil, but misplaced. Like a song played in the wrong key. "I'm taking you somewhere safe," she said, lifting the creature gently. It was lighter than she expected, like holding a bundle of mist. "Hold on." With a flutter of her wings, Lumina rose into the air, the violet glow fading behind her. The wind carried her swiftly, and the stars above blinked in quiet approval. She flew higher than usual, past the drifting clouds and into the realm where the sky turned silver and the air sang. The Crescent Spire shimmered into view, its crystalline surface catching the moonlight. Lumina landed on the outer balcony, where the Keeper of Dust, an ancient sprite named Solon, waited with his ever-watchful gaze. He frowned as she approached, his eyes narrowing at the bundle in her arms. "What have you done, Lumina?" She hesitated. "It fell. Not like stardust. It crashed. And it's hurt." Solon stepped forward, inspecting the creature. His expression shifted from stern to troubled. "This is not from our skies," he murmured. "This is something else. Something forgotten." Lumina's heart fluttered. "Can we help it?" Solon looked at her, then at the stars above. "We must try," he said. "But know this, what you've brought may change everything." Lumina followed Solon into the inner chamber of the spire, where the walls shimmered with the light of 1,000 collected stars. The creature in her arms stirred, its silver eyes scanning the room with cautious wonder. Other sprites peeked from behind crystal columns, whispering among themselves. None had ever seen anything like it. Solon gestured to a resting platform woven from moonvine and cloudlace. "Lay it here," he said gently. Lumina obeyed, brushing a strand of frost from the creature's brow. It looked at her, its gaze filled with something ancient, gratitude, perhaps, or recognition. Solon began to chant, his voice low and rhythmic, drawing threads of starlight from the walls. They wrapped around the creature like a cocoon, pulsing with warmth. Lumina watched, her satchel forgotten at her side. "What is it?" she asked. Solon didn't answer immediately. He moved with purpose, his hands weaving light into patterns that shimmered and dissolved. Finally, he spoke. "It's a remnant," he said. "A being from before the stars were named. They were thought to be lost, scattered when the great silence fell." Lumina's breath caught. She had heard stories of the silence, a time when the skies went dark and the stars ceased to sing. But they were myths, bedtime tales for young sprites. "Why now?" she whispered. "Why return?" Solon's eyes darkened. "Something is stirring beyond the veil. The stars have begun to murmur again, but not in joy. In warning." The creature stirred, its voice barely audible. "The shard must not remain." Lumina turned to Solon. "The violet shard. It's still out there." Solon nodded grimly. "It must be retrieved. It holds a memory too powerful to be left untended." Lumina felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. She had broken the rules. But now, she was part of something bigger, something ancient and unfolding. "I'll go," she said. Solon looked at her, pride flickering in his gaze. "Then go swiftly, Lumina. The stars are watching." Lumina soared into the night, her wings slicing through the cold air like whispers. The stars above blinked in solemn silence, their light dimmer than usual. She felt their unease, a quiet tension humming through the sky. The violet shard had disturbed something ancient, and the stars were listening. She retraced her path to the crater, now rimmed with frost and silence. The violet glow had faded, but the shard remained, half buried in the earth like a forgotten relic. Lumina hovered above it, her satchel clutched tightly. She reached out, hesitating only a moment before touching the shard. It pulsed beneath her fingers. A vision struck her, blinding and sudden. She saw a vast expanse of stars, not the ones she knew, but older, colder, flickering like dying embers. A voice echoed through the void, deep and resonant. "The silence returns. The remnants awaken. The dust must remember." Then it was gone. Lumina staggered back, breathless. The shard was no longer just a fragment, it was a key. A memory locked in crystal, waiting to be understood. She wrapped it in her cloak, careful not to let its energy touch her skin again. As she turned to leave, the wind shifted. A shadow moved at the edge of the trees. Not a sprite. Not a creature of light. It was tall, cloaked in darkness, its eyes twin voids that drank the starlight. Lumina froze. "You shouldn't have come," the figure said, voice like cracking ice. She clutched the shard tighter. "Who are you?" The figure stepped closer. "A watcher. We guard the silence. That shard belongs to the void." Lumina's wings flared. "It belongs to the stars. And I won't let you take it." The watcher tilted its head. "Then you've chosen your side." The wind howled, and the stars above flickered in alarm. Lumina launched into the air, the shard glowing hot against her chest. The watcher didn't follow, but its presence lingered, like a storm waiting to break. She had the shard. But now, the void knew her name. Lumina didn't stop flying until the crescent spire rose into view once more, its crystalline towers glowing faintly in the pre-dawn haze. Her wings ached, her breath came in short bursts, and the shard burned cold against her chest. But she didn't slow. Solon was waiting on the balcony, his expression unreadable. Behind him, the remnant lay resting, its breathing steadier now, its wings wrapped in healing light. You have it, Solon said, not as a question. Lumina nodded and unwrapped the shard. Its violet glow had dimmed, but the energy within still pulsed, slow, deliberate, like a heartbeat echoing across time. Solon reached out, but paused before touching it. It's awake, he murmured. And it remembers. Lumina stepped back. There was a watcher. It spoke of the silence. It said I'd chosen a side. Solon's face darkened. The watchers were once guardians of balance. But when the silence fell, they turned inward, guarding not the stars, but the void between them. They fear what the remnants remember. The remnant stirred at the sound of their voices. Its silver eyes opened, locking onto the shard. It is a seed, it said softly. A memory of what we were. Of what we lost. Lumina moved closer. Can it be restored? The remnant hesitated. Only if the dust remembers. Solon turned to Lumina. You've done more than collect stardust tonight. You've awakened a story long buried. The stars will not ignore this. Lumina looked down at the shard, then at the remnant. She felt the weight of her choice settle into her bones, not heavy, but grounding. She had stepped beyond her role, beyond the rules. And now, the sky itself was shifting. What happens now? She asked. Solon's gaze lifted to the horizon, where the first light of dawn touched the clouds. Now, he said, we listen. We learn. And we prepare. The stars above shimmered faintly, as if in agreement. And far beyond the veil of night, something stirred. Something that had been waiting. The days that followed were unlike any Lumina had ever known. The remnant, now called Kale, remained in the healing chamber, slowly regaining strength. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were heavy with meaning, fragments of a time before time, of stars that sang in harmony, and of a great forgetting that had silenced them all. Lumina spent her nights collecting stardust as always, but her eyes were sharper now, her senses tuned to the subtle shifts in the sky. The stars whispered more urgently. Some blinked out for moments at a time, as if hiding from something unseen. One evening, as she returned from her rounds, she found Kale standing on the balcony, his wings still torn but steady. He looked out over the horizon, where the stars met the curve of the world. You feel it too, he said without turning. Lumina nodded. The silence is creeping back. Kale's voice was soft. It never left. It only slept. She stepped beside him. What do we do? Kale turned to her, his silver eyes glowing faintly. The shard you found is one of many. Each holds a piece of the memory we lost. If we can gather them, we may awaken the song again. The song? She asked. He nodded. The true voice of the stars. It once bound all things in harmony. But when the silence came, it shattered. The watchers were meant to protect it, but they chose fear. Lumina's heart beat faster. Then we find the shards. All of them. Kale smiled, a flicker of hope in his expression. You would do that? For a forgotten song? She looked up at the stars, her satchel glowing softly at her side. For the stars. For the dust. For the dreamers. Behind them, Solon watched in silence, the weight of ages in his eyes. The journey ahead would be long. But the first note had been sung. And the stars were listening. In a cozy little garden nestled behind a weathered cottage, under the watchful eye of the moon, lived a family of sleepy garden gnomes. Their home was tucked beneath a flowering hydrangea bush, its blossoms forming a soft canopy of lavender and blue. The gnomes, Papa Thistle, Mama Petal, and their three little ones, Pip, Nib, and Tansy, were not the kind of gnomes who stood frozen in flower beds. No, these gnomes came to life when the stars blinked on and the world grew quiet. Tonight was a special night. The wind was gentle, the moon was full, and the garden was bathed in silver light. It was the perfect evening for a cozy night in. Inside their mushroom-shaped cottage, the hearth glowed with warm amber light. Mama Petal stirred a pot of honeyroot stew, its sweet aroma curling through the air. Papa Thistle reclined in his mossy armchair, puffing on a pipe carved from acorn wood, while Pip and Nib played a game of pebble chess on the rug. Tansy, the youngest, sat curled up in a thimble-sized rocking chair, reading a book of bedtime tales about brave beetles and wise old owls. Outside, the garden rustled softly. Fireflies blinked lazily among the tall grass, and the roses nodded their heads in sleep. A hedgehog waddled past the front door, pausing to sniff the air before continuing on its moonlit patrol. "Stew's ready," Mama Petal called, wiping her hands on a petal-patterned apron. The gnomes gathered around the table, carved from a single slab of birch bark. Bowls were passed, spoons clinked, and laughter bubbled up like spring water. It was a simple meal, but it tasted of comfort and home. As they ate, a soft knock came at the door. Papa Thistle raised a bushy eyebrow. Who could that be at this hour? Nib scampered over and opened the door just a crack. Standing there, shivering slightly, was a frog in a tiny waistcoat. "Pardon me," he croaked. "I seem to have lost my way." Nib blinked at the frog, then turned to call over his shoulder, "Mama, there's a frog in a waistcoat at the door." Mama Petal bustled over, wiping her hands again. She peeked out and gasped softly. "Oh, you poor dear. Come in before you catch a chill." The frog stepped inside, his webbed feet tapping delicately on the polished pebble floor. He removed his tiny top hat and bowed. "Terribly sorry to intrude. I was on my way to the Lily Pond Gala and took a wrong turn near the tulip beds. I've been wandering ever since." Papa Thistle chuckled, offering the frog a seat near the hearth. "You're not the first to get lost in our garden. It's bigger than it looks." The frog sighed with relief as the warmth of the fire reached him. "You have a lovely home. Quite the cozy retreat." Tansy hopped down from her chair and offered him a blanket stitched from dandelion fluff. "You can stay for stew if you like." "Oh, I wouldn't want to impose." "Nonsense," Mama Petal said, already ladling a bowl. "No one goes hungry in this house." As the frog, whose name turned out to be Bartholomew, ate his stew, the gnomes gathered around, listening to tales of the Lily Pond Gala, where dragonflies performed aerial dances and water lilies sang in harmony. Pip and Nib were especially enchanted, their eyes wide with wonder. "I've never been to a gala," Pip whispered. Bartholomew smiled. "Perhaps one day you'll come as my guests." Papa Thistle raised an eyebrow. "If you can find your way back, that is." Bartholomew laughed, a deep, croaky sound. "I'll be sure to bring a map next time." Outside, the moon climbed higher, casting a gentle glow over the garden. Inside, the fire crackled, the stew simmered, and laughter filled the air. It was, indeed, a cozy night in. But as the wind shifted and a faint rustle stirred the ivy near the window, Tansy looked up, her brow furrowing. Did anyone else hear that? Everyone paused. The fire crackled. The stew bubbled. But outside, the ivy rustled again, this time more insistently, like something brushing against it with purpose. Papa Thistle set down his spoon and stood. "Stay here," he said, reaching for his walking stick, which doubled as a rather effective thistlethorn prodder. "I'll have a look." "I'll come too," Pip said, already halfway to the door. "No, Pip," Mama Petal said firmly. "Let your father check." Papa Thistle opened the door slowly. The garden beyond was still bathed in moonlight, but the shadows near the ivy wall had grown deeper. He stepped outside, his boots crunching softly on the gravel path. "Hello?" he called. "Anyone there?" A pause. Then, a sneeze. "Ochoo." Papa Thistle blinked. bless you?" From behind the ivy emerged a small, flustered hedgehog wearing a lopsided scarf and dragging a tiny cart filled with what looked like teacups. "Oh dear," the hedgehog sniffled. "I didn't mean to startle anyone. I was just trying to deliver these before the dew set in." Papa Thistle peered into the cart. "Teacups?" "Midnight delivery," the hedgehog said proudly. "From Miss Wren's porcelain nest. She said the gnomes had ordered a new set for winter." Papa Thistle chuckled. "That we did. You're just a bit early, friend." The hedgehog looked sheepish. "I got excited. And a little lost." "Well, come in then," Papa Thistle said, waving him toward the door. "You're just in time for stew." Inside, the gnomes welcomed the hedgehog with warm smiles and a fresh bowl. Bartholomew the frog offered him a seat beside the fire, and Tansy fetched a napkin embroidered with tiny mushrooms. As the two unexpected guests settled in, the gnome cottage grew even cozier. The wind outside softened, the ivy stilled, and the moonlight spilled gently through the windows. Nib leaned over to Pip and whispered, "Best cozy night ever." Pip grinned. "And it's not even bedtime yet." After dinner, Mama Petal brought out a tray of cinnamon thistle cookies and warm chamomile tea. The hedgehog, whose name was Mr. Puddlewick, accepted his cup with a grateful nod, while Bartholomew the frog dabbed his mouth politely with his napkin and leaned back with a satisfied sigh. Tansy, still curious about the sound she'd heard earlier, tiptoed to the window and peeked out. The ivy was still. The garden was peaceful. But something in the air felt expectant. "Papa," she said softly, "do you think the garden's trying to tell us something?" Papa Thistle looked up from his tea. "The garden always speaks, little sprout. We just have to listen." Nib and Pip joined her at the window, pressing their noses to the glass. Fireflies danced lazily in the moonlight, and the roses swayed gently, as if nodding in agreement. Suddenly, a soft glow appeared near the old stone well at the edge of the garden. It wasn't firefly light, it was steadier, warmer, and pulsing like a heartbeat. "Look," Pip whispered. The gnomes gathered at the window, even Mr. Puddlewick and Bartholomew. The glow grew brighter, then dimmed, then brightened again. Mama Petal gasped. "It's the moonseed bloom." Papa Thistle's eyes widened. "But that only blossoms once every 100 years. The moonseed bloom was a rare flower, hidden deep in the garden's oldest corner. It only opened under a full moon when the garden was at peace and the air was filled with kindness. Its petals shimmered like silver silk, and its scent was said to bring the sweetest dreams." "We must go see it," Tansy said, bouncing on her toes. Papa Thistle nodded. "Bundle up, everyone. This is a night to remember." The gnomes donned their tiny cloaks and scarves, and with lanterns in hand, they stepped out into the moonlit garden. The path to the well was lined with sleepy daisies and yawning tulips, and the air was filled with the soft hum of nighttime magic. At the edge of the well, the moonseed bloom glowed in full splendor. And the garden gnomes stood in awe. The moonseed bloom shimmered like a dream made real. Its petals unfurled slowly, revealing a glowing center that pulsed with gentle light. The gnomes stood in a circle around it, their lanterns dimmed in reverence. Even Mr. Puddlewick and Bartholomew were silent, their eyes wide with wonder. "It's beautiful," Tansy whispered, her voice barely louder than the breeze. Papa Thistle nodded solemnly. "It only blooms when the garden is truly at peace. It's a sign that all is well." Mama Petal knelt beside the flower, her fingers brushing the edge of a petal. "They say if you make a wish while it blooms, the garden hears you." Nib and Pip exchanged excited glances. "Can we wish?" Pip asked. "Of course," Mama Petal said with a smile. "But make it gentle. The garden likes gentle wishes." One by one, the gnomes closed their eyes and made their wishes. Pip wished for a beetle to ride. Nib wished for a pebble that glowed in the dark. Tansy wished for a story that never ended. Mama Petal wished for more nights like this. Papa Thistle wished for the garden to stay safe and sleepy. Bartholomew and Mr. Puddlewick hesitated, then made their own quiet wishes, ones they didn't speak aloud, but which the moonseed bloom seemed to understand. As the last wish was made, the bloom pulsed once more, brighter than before. A soft breeze swept through the garden, carrying the scent of jasmine and moss. The stars above twinkled in approval. Then, slowly, the petals began to close. The bloom had heard. The gnomes lingered a moment longer, then turned back toward their cottage, their hearts full and their steps light. The garden glowed softly behind them, as if smiling. Inside, the fire had dimmed to embers, and the stew pot was empty. Mama Petal tucked the little ones into bed, while Papa Thistle hung their cloaks to dry. Outside, the moonseed bloom faded into the shadows, waiting for the next 100 years. And in the cozy little cottage, under the watchful eye of the moon, the garden gnomes dreamed sweet, sleepy dreams. The forest was quiet, wrapped in a velvet hush that only the night could bring. Silver moonlight spilled through the canopy, painting the mossy ground in soft, dappled light. Crickets chirped in gentle rhythm, and the wind whispered through the leaves like a lullaby. Perched on a crooked branch of the old elm tree, Hoot blinked slowly. His round, amber eyes drooped, and his tiny chest rose and fell with a sigh. He loved the night, its mystery, its music, its magic. But tonight, something was different. He was sleepy. Extra sleepy. Hoot gave a little yawn, his beak opening wide, and his feathers puffing out. "Oh dear," he murmured to himself, "I've never felt this drowsy before." He tried to shake it off. After all, nighttime was his time. The stars were out, the moon was full, and the forest was waiting. But his wings felt heavy, and his thoughts wandered like clouds. Still, he fluttered down from his branch and landed softly on the forest floor. The moss was cool beneath his talons, and the scent of pine and damp earth filled the air. He waddled toward the clearing where the night creatures gathered, badgers, foxes, hedgehogs, and mice, all drawn by the moon's gentle pull. "Hoot," called Bramble the badger, his voice warm and gravelly. "You're late for the moonlight song." "I know," Hoot said, rubbing one eye with his wing. "I'm just so sleepy tonight." Bramble chuckled. "Well, maybe a good song will wake you up." Hoot smiled faintly and took his place on the mossy log where he always sang. The others settled in, eyes bright, ears perked. The moon hung low and golden, casting a glow over the gathering. Hoot opened his beak to sing, but instead of a clear, melodic hoot, out came a soft snore. Everyone blinked. "Oh dear," whispered Hoot, startled awake. "That wasn't supposed to happen." The clearing fell into a stunned silence. A few mice exchanged puzzled glances. Bramble scratched behind his ear with a thick paw. Even the fireflies seemed to pause mid-glow. Hoot blinked again, mortified. "I'm so sorry," he said, fluffing his feathers in embarrassment. "I don't know what came over me." "It's all right, little one," said Maple, the soft-spoken fox, her tail curling around her paws. "Even the stars need rest sometimes." "But I've never missed a moonlight song," Hoot said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's my favorite part of the night." Bramble gave a thoughtful grunt. "Maybe your body's telling you something. Maybe tonight, you need to listen." Hoot looked up at the moon, which seemed to shimmer more gently than usual. He felt the tug of sleep again, like a warm blanket being pulled over his wings. But he didn't want to miss the magic. Not tonight. "I'll try again," he said, hopping back onto the log. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began to hum softly. The tune was slower than usual, more like a lullaby than a celebration. But it was beautiful. Gentle and wistful, like the hush of wind through pine needles. The animals leaned in, enchanted. Even the owlets nestled in the trees above stopped their fidgeting to listen. Hoot's voice wavered once or twice, but he kept going, letting the melody carry him like a drifting leaf. When he finished, the clearing was silent again, but this time, it was the kind of silence that follows something sacred. That, whispered Maple, was the most peaceful song I've ever heard. Hoot smiled sleepily. Thank you, he murmured. I think I'll just rest my eyes for a moment. He curled up on the log, tucking his head beneath his wing. The moonlight bathed him in silver, and the forest seemed to exhale. And then, from the shadows, came a rustle. A new sound. A stranger's sound. The rustle came again, soft but deliberate, like footsteps brushing against fallen leaves. The animals in the clearing stiffened. Bramble stood, his nose twitching. Maple's ears perked, and the mice scurried closer together. From the shadows beneath the elderberry bush, a figure emerged, small, cloaked in feathers, but not one of their own. It was another owl, though unlike Hoot, this one had silvery plumage that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Her eyes were pale blue, like frost on a window pane. Hello, she said, her voice like wind through reeds. I didn't mean to startle you. Hoot stirred, blinking sleepily. Who are you? My name is Luna, she said, stepping into the light. I've flown from the northern woods. I heard your song. You did? Hoot sat up, feathers ruffled. But it was just a sleepy tune. Luna smiled. It was more than that. It was a lullaby for the forest. I followed it here. The animals murmured in awe. A song that could travel through trees and valleys? That could call someone from far away? I've never heard anything like it, Luna continued. It reminded me of home. Of quiet nights and gentle dreams. Hoot flushed beneath his feathers. I didn't mean to sing anything special. I was just tired. Sometimes, Luna said, settling beside him on the log, the most beautiful things come when we're not trying. The clearing relaxed. Bramble sat back down, and the mice resumed nibbling on berries. The fireflies resumed their dance, twinkling like stars. Luna looked up at the moon. Would you sing again? Hoot hesitated. He was still sleepy, but something about Luna's presence made him feel lighter, more awake. He nodded slowly. This time, he sang not just for the forest, but for the stranger who had come so far. His voice was soft, but steady, weaving through the trees like mist. Luna joined in, her harmony delicate and clear. Together, they sang a moonlit duet that wrapped the forest in warmth. And somewhere deep in the woods, something ancient stirred. The duet faded into the hush of the forest, leaving behind a shimmering stillness. The moon, now high above, seemed to pulse with quiet joy. Hoot and Luna sat side by side, their feathers brushing gently, their hearts light. But beneath the earth, something stirred. A low hum began to rise from the roots of the trees, a vibration felt more than heard. The animals looked around, ears twitching, paws frozen mid-motion. Even the wind seemed to pause. What is that? Whispered Maple, her voice barely audible. Luna tilted her head. It's old, she said. Very old. From the base of the ancient elm, a soft glow began to emerge. The bark shimmered, and a crack appeared, not jagged or broken, but smooth, like a door opening. Hoot hopped down from the log, curiosity overcoming his sleepiness. Luna followed, her wings slightly spread. The animals gathered behind them, cautious but drawn by the mystery. Inside the tree, nestled in a hollow chamber, was a stone. Not just any stone, it was smooth and round, etched with swirling patterns that glowed faintly in the moonlight. It pulsed in rhythm with the song they had just sung. It's a memory stone, Luna breathed. I've heard of them in stories. They hold the songs of the forest. Hoot stared, wide-eyed. did our song wake it? I think it did, she said. Your lullaby, it wasn't just music. It was a key. The stone shimmered brighter, and a soft melody began to play, not from any mouth or instrument, but from the stone itself. It was a song of ancient nights, of stars long gone, of owls who sang before time had names. The animals listened, spellbound. Hoot felt tears prick his eyes, not of sadness, but of wonder. He had sung from his heart, and the forest had answered. Luna turned to him, her eyes glowing. You've awakened something beautiful, Hoot. He blinked slowly, sleep tugging at him again. I didn't mean to, he murmured. But you did, she said. And now, the forest remembers. The memory stone continued to hum, its glow casting soft ripples of light across the clearing. Hoot sat quietly, his feathers ruffled from the emotion of it all. Luna remained beside him, her gaze fixed on the stone as if listening to stories only she could hear. The animals began to settle again, some curling into nests of leaves, others resting against tree trunks. The night had shifted, no longer just a time for songs and stories, but something deeper. A shared dream. Hoot yawned again, this time without apology. I think I really do need to sleep now, he said, his voice thick with drowsiness. Luna nodded. You've done more than enough tonight. He fluttered up to a low branch of the elm, just above the glowing stone. The bark was warm beneath his talons, and the air smelled of moss and moonlight. He tucked his head beneath his wing, but before sleep took him, he whispered, Will you stay? Luna looked up, her pale eyes soft. I'll be here when you wake. And so Hoot slept. His dreams were filled with music, songs he'd never heard but somehow knew. He flew through starlit skies, past ancient trees and glowing rivers. He saw owls of every kind, singing in harmony, their voices weaving through time. He saw the memory stone pulsing with light, collecting each note like a treasure. When he woke, the sky was still dark, but the moon had dipped low. Luna was still there, watching the horizon. You sang in your sleep, she said with a smile. I did? Hoot blinked. She nodded. The forest listened. Hoot stretched his wings, feeling rested and light. Maybe being sleepy isn't so bad. It's when we're quiet, Luna said, that the deepest songs come. The animals began to stir, the clearing slowly returning to its usual rhythm. But something had changed. The memory stone remained, a quiet guardian of the night's magic. And Hoot, the little owl who loved the night, had found a new kind of song, one born not of energy, but of stillness. The forest slowly returned to its rhythm, but the memory of the night lingered like the scent of rain on bark. The animals moved with a quiet reverence, as if they too had been changed by the song and the stone. Even the wind seemed to carry a softer tune. Hoot stretched his wings and looked around. The clearing felt different now, more alive, more aware. He hopped down from the elm and joined Luna, who was watching the last of the moonlight fade behind the hills. Do you think it will sing again? He asked, glancing back at the memory stone. Luna nodded. When the forest needs it. When someone sings from the heart. Hoot tilted his head. I didn't know I could do that. You didn't need to, she said. You just needed to feel. They walked together through the clearing, past sleepy hedgehogs and yawning foxes, until they reached a small rise where the trees parted just enough to see the stars. The sky was beginning to pale at the edges, the first hints of dawn brushing the horizon. I should probably head home, Hoot said, though he didn't move. Luna looked at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. Or you could stay a little longer. He smiled. Maybe just a little. They sat in silence, watching the stars fade one by one. The forest behind them was quiet, but not empty. It was full of memory now, of song, of sleep, of something ancient and kind. And as the first bird of morning chirped from a distant branch, Hoot felt something new stir in his chest. Not just sleepiness, not just song, but belonging. He looked at Luna and whispered, "Will you sing with me again?" She nodded. "Always." And so, as the sun rose and the night slipped gently away, two owls sat side by side, dreaming of the next moonlit song.